So, how in the world did Nazi Germany go from being a nation in total ruins to a terrifying war machine in just 6 years? It's often called an economic miracle, something that seems to defy all logic. But the thing is, it wasn't a miracle at all. It was an illusion, one that was meticulously engineered. And we're about to pull back the curtain and see exactly how the trick was done. I mean, just look at this. On the left, you've got Berlin in 1933, 30% unemployment. Soup kitchens on every corner, a nation completely on its knees. Now shift your eyes to the right, just 6 years later, Berlin, 1939. Unemployment is basically zero. The soup kitchens are gone, and in their place, you have these massive military parades, showing off a brand new, incredibly powerful army. So you gotta ask, right? How is that even possible? How do you build an army of that size from nothing, get everyone back to work, and get ready for a massive war when your country has no money, no resources, and is still digging out from a total collapse? That's the big mystery we're diving into. Well, the answer, believe it or not, really boils down to one guy, Hjalmar Schacht. He was this brilliant but completely unorthodox economist, and he had this ominous nickname, the Dark Wizard of International Finance. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, right? But his financial tricks seem to conjure an economic recovery out of thin air. Okay, so to really get what Schacht pulled off, you first have to understand just how bad things were. We need to take a quick look at the absolute storm of crises that brought Germany's Weimar Republic to the breaking point. I mean, Germany was getting hit by a perfect storm of economic nightmares. You had the crushing war reparations from World War I, a mountain of debt from the war itself, the national trauma of hyperinflation in 23, where money became worthless, and then the knockout blow, the global Great Depression. And here's where it gets kind of crazy. To get the foreign cash they needed to pay their debts, the government's brilliant idea was to intentionally tank their own economy. They imposed brutal austerity to make people too poor to buy imported goods. And the result? Exactly what you'd expect. Skyrocketing unemployment, terrible poverty, and a desperate population that started listening to radical voices like the Nazis. All right, so into this absolute mess steps Hjalmar Schacht, now working for Hitler. And he wasn't playing by any normal economic rulebook. Nope. He had his own toolkit, full of unorthodox and, frankly, pretty brutal methods to get the job done. So Schacht basically gets handed this impossible to-do list. Number 1, fix the massive unemployment. Number 2, build a gigantic army and do it in secret. And number 3, solve this huge currency crisis where Germany was spending way more money abroad than it was taking in. Any one of these would be tough. He had to do all 3 at once. And to pull it off, he used a whole host of really unconventional policies. This was his spellbook, the Dark Wizard's Toolkit. We're talking about hidden government spending, total control over what people earned and what things cost, and even deciding which debts the country would pay. Let's zoom in on the most ingenious, and let's be honest, the most deceptive tool of them all. Okay, get ready for this, because this was Schacht's absolute masterpiece of trickery, the MIFO bill. He set up a shell company, basically a fake business, that would order tanks, planes, and guns. This company paid for them, not with money, but with these special IOUs, these MIFO bills. But here's the genius evil part. Schacht secretly had Germany's central bank guarantee them. So it was a way to run up a massive military credit card completely off the books, hidden from the rest of the world. Now, you might be thinking, all that secret money printing? That should have caused runaway inflation, right? Well, Schacht had a fix for that, and it wasn't pretty. He just used force. He banned unions and froze wages, so workers saw almost no benefit from the recovery. Then he simply made it illegal to raise prices on everyday goods. Inflation? Solved. Not with smart policy, but with brute force. And this next move, it's just a perfect example of his ruthless whatever-it-takes mindset. To deal with the currency crisis, he basically tells the world, yeah, we're not paying our debts anymore. But, and this is key, he didn't say it to everyone. He stopped payments to countries like the US, but kept paying countries like the UK to make sure Germany could still buy the raw materials it needed from them. So on the surface, the miracle is working. Unemployment is gone, the army looks incredible. But all of this had a hidden cost, a really steep one. And you have to ask, who was actually paying the price for this so-called recovery? Well, the Nazi propaganda machine was screaming from the rooftops. Full employment, prosperity for everyone. But what was the reality on the ground for the average German family? A totally different story. Sure, people had jobs, but their wages hadn't gone up. And because all the resources were being funneled into the military, there were constant shortages of things like clothes and quality food. This table breaks it down perfectly. It was a zero-sum game. You want more steel for tanks? Fine. You cut the steel quota for building new houses, so the housing crisis gets even worse. You need foreign money for rubber and oil? Okay. You slash imports of cotton and wool, creating shortages of clothing. You see the pattern here? Every single tank, every bullet was paid for by taking something away from the German people. And this is maybe the most important takeaway of all. This economic miracle was only possible by completely crushing freedom. Workers couldn't bargain for wages because their unions were gone. Business owners couldn't run their companies as they saw fit. And then there's the most sinister part. These capital controls were used as a weapon to steal the wealth of Jewish families trying to escape Germany, trapping them and their assets inside the country. But here's the thing about a system like this, one built on tricks and force. It can't last. It's not sustainable. In fact, Schacht's entire system wasn't a model for a healthy, peaceful country. It was a ticking time bomb, an economy designed for one thing and one thing only: war. And this is where Schacht's vision ultimately clashed with Hitler's. For all his dark methods, what Schacht really wanted was to restore Germany's old economic power. But Hitler, his ambitions were, well, they were limitless. He didn't want to restore Germany, he wanted a war machine for total conquest. And Schacht's careful, tricky system just wasn't fast or aggressive enough for him. So as Hitler put the pedal to the metal on his war plans, Schacht, the careful wizard, was no longer useful. He gets pushed aside for Hermann Göring's much more aggressive 4-year plan. He quits his economy minister, then gets fired from the central bank, and then, in the ultimate twist of irony, the man who built the Nazi war machine ended up arrested by the Nazis and thrown into a concentration camp himself. So, with the dark wizard gone, how do you keep this war machine fed? There's only one way left. You steal. The system became purely predatory. The first big score was looting Austria's entire gold and foreign currency reserves in 1938. That bought them a little more time. From then on, the entire economic model was just conquer, loot, prepare for the next conquest, and repeat. But in the end, no amount of plundering could change the cold, hard math you see on this chart. For all of Schacht's cleverness and the early military successes, Germany's economy, which was poor in resources, stood absolutely no chance against the combined industrial power of the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and especially the United States. The so-called miracle was always destined to crash and burn against this sheer industrial power. So, you might think this is all just a history lesson, right? But the story of sacrificing economic freedom for the ambitions of the state isn't just about the past. It leaves us with a pretty chilling question for today. As we face our own major crises, whether they're economic, environmental, or political, could we see governments turning back to some of these oppressive tools, all in the name of solving a crisis? It's definitely something to think about.